out today. I'm glad that you have joined us. If you're joining us online, you're welcome to be here too. Sort of you're here, but we'd love to have you here in person anyway. So jump on, get out of your warm little house and look at all these people who get out of their warm little houses today, right? I'm so glad. Marie's like, it's going to be really cold in the morning. I'm not sure if our attendance is going to be that great. And look, here you are. Here you are. And there you are online, cozy in your couch. But anyway, we're starting a new series today for the next 4 or 5 weeks, Lord willing. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are we in the end times? Yeah. Actually, biblically speaking, since Jesus rose from the dead, that's when the end times dispensation began. And so the answer is yes. But the question that naturally follows sounds something like this. Is Jesus coming back soon? Right? I mean, that's the question that we usually talk about, is at the end of all things. Now, we don't know the date that Jesus will come back, but we do have a mandate to be ready when He does return. When Hamas launched their attack against Israel, the topic of end times became the conversation piece in a lot of circles. Certainly, I received a lot of questions about it and have questions about it. And so this series is to help people get their arms around the end times conversations and questions. Now, there may be some things that I say that aren't perfectly right when things wind up the way they wind up, but we're going to do our best to address some of the questions that we have when it talks about, when we think about the end of the world. And so many things in this world right now seem like they're coming apart, don't they? Like the conflict in the Middle East, or our government's inability to solve simple problems, simple in my mind anyway. The moral fiber of our society seems to just be in, is in chaos, where people are questioning all types of moral values. And so there's that. But then on a more personal level, there's probably part of your world that might feel like it's coming apart. Maybe things are good for you right now, but I know in a crowd this size, and I know some of your stories, that it seems like your world is coming apart. And sometimes, if the Lord's good to us and we live a long life, we can look back and see that when things were coming apart, they were actually coming together. Have you ever had this thought? It seemed like things were coming apart during that season of my life, but really they were coming together. I don't know if that's your story yet. You might be in the middle of it. You might still be waiting to see how God's going to make sense out of everything that got torn apart. But some of you have gone through a terrible divorce, a difficult recovery from addiction, a bankruptcy, a battle with cancer, or where there were these months or maybe even years where life just didn't make much sense, and it seemed like the things you could count on, you couldn't count on any longer. But as I mentioned, if you're able to look back, if you're able to stay faithful and you see God put some of those pieces back together, and that which was lost has now been found, that which didn't make any sense in the moment now has become something that you really see how God worked, and your faith is so much better than it was before the crisis. God is able to take a world coming apart and build a brand new future. That's what the Bible says. When the world's coming apart, God is at work. And He's going to use these broken pieces to build a brand new future. So God has a plan to put a falling apart world back together. But we have to be ready for the new future. The theme verse for this series is Matthew 24:44. You must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. Now, these are the closing remarks that Jesus has with His disciples. The conversation actually begins in Jerusalem, in the temple courts. And so that's where we're going to begin reading from Matthew 24, verse 1. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, His disciples pointed out to Him the various temple buildings. But he responded, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." Now, I can only imagine as they are exiting the temple courts, he's the big man on campus. Everybody's got opinions about who he is, and everybody's paying close attention to him. And so when he says those things, I bet Peter goes, "Shh, be quiet. These buildings are really important to a lot of people, including me. So when you say things like that, it just rattles my mind. It makes me very unstable." See, the disciples, they could not imagine their capital being destroyed. They could not imagine this temple that Herod built. According to John 2:20, it took 46 years for Herod to build this temple. And we do know from history that about 40 years later, 70 A.D., Jerusalem and the temple would be destroyed. And so they couldn't imagine, you see, the disciples grew up in a world where this was always with them, and they couldn't imagine a nation without their capital and without their place of worship. But God would work through all that destruction that took place in those years so long ago to bring something new about, and we're sitting in it. We call it the church. And so God is able, He has a history of taking things falling apart and putting them back together. Now, Jesus, as He begins this conversation with the disciples, He leads them up to the Mount of Olives, not too far a walk, but it overlooks the temple and it overlooks Jerusalem. And there He's going to finish this conversation with His disciples. And so when they get to this place on the Mount of Olives, it says Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to Him privately and said, "Tell us when all this will happen. What sign will signal your return and the end of the world?" See, they want to know, when is all this going to come apart? They're asking two questions, right? We see two question marks in our English translation of what they say to Jesus. Two question marks, two questions. So when will all this happen, and what will signal the return of the end of the world? When's this? So in their mind, they're asking two questions, but they're really just asking one question. Because as I said, they can't imagine a world without Jerusalem and without the temple. Now, in chapter 24 of Matthew is a hotly debated chapter in the Bible by different theologians and people who talk about end times. And why it's complicated is the disciples ask two questions. They think they've only asked one, but Jesus is going to respond back answering two questions. The first question that He's going to respond back to is, when is the end of Jerusalem and the temple? And the second question He's going to respond back to is, when is His second coming? When will He come back to earth? When is the end of the world as they know it, right? And I'm not singing the song. But anyway, it's right there. It's just right there in my head. But, I'm not going to sing it. But anyway, my point is, when you read this chapter, it's difficult to know where to put the information Jesus shares under which question heading. Is Jesus talking about the end of Jerusalem and the temple, or is Jesus talking about the end of the world? And there are many opinions about Matthew 24 and what Jesus says. And my guess is in the next 5 weeks, I'm going to get some of your opinions, right? And we all have opinions. But anyway, it's hard to distinguish which of these verses go where. And it complicates our answers are complicated by what period of history we're living in and where we're living in the world. There are certain parts in South Africa or Southeast Asia that the world is ending right now for those people. They can't even imagine trying to go get water without dying. There's so much war and turmoil and chaos that if you ask them when the end of the world is, it started a year ago for us. You see what I'm saying? And so it depends on where you're at and how you interpret these things. But here's what Jesus did not know. He did not know when these things would take place. He says, however, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son Himself. Only the Father knows. Now, we know, looking back, that the destruction of Jerusalem took place in 70 A.D. Will Jerusalem be destroyed again? I don't know. But it's been destroyed once, so this prophecy has been fulfilled. Maybe it'll be fulfilled again, but I don't know. But the second coming of Jesus hasn't happened because this world is still rotating as it was back then. But many have tried to predict the second coming of Jesus, the end of the world. Back in 300-some A.D., a bishop named Hilary said that the end of the world would happen in 365 A.D. Here in America, in 1975, the Jehovah's Witnesses said the end of the world will be 1975. Chuck Smith predicted that the end of the world would happen in 1981. Pat Robertson said 1982. Louis Farrakhan said the end of the world will be 1991. Jerry Falwell Sr., Tim LaHaye, and Jerry Jenkins predicted the end of the world in the year 2000. My point is, there are going to be people that come along and say the end of the world is going to happen at this year, this month, this day, whatever, and here's the answer. They don't know. They don't know. We just don't know. Only the Father knows. But here's what we do know. Be ready. Be ready. Jesus says you must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. So we're talking about the second coming. Is Jesus coming again? Is the end of the world coming? And the answer is yes, it is. We don't know when, but we're talking about what theologians call eschatology, all right? So if you go to the doctor or the dentist this week, you can say, yeah, I've been studying new science, eschatology. And they go, huh? So the word eschaton in Greek simply means the end. Eschatology is the study of end times. And so what we're talking about, second coming of Jesus, the end of the world, who the man of lawlessness is, we're talking about issues that address the end of all things and the beginning, because eschatology also includes the study of the new heaven and the new earth. But when Jesus says that he's coming soon, soon is not a reference to when, but it is a reference to how he arrives. So don't look for a long ramp up to Jesus' second coming. Look for an instantaneous twinkling of an eye, like the thief showed up on your doorstep, totally unexpected. In a moment, he's right there. That's what Jesus is talking about when he talks about soon. Instantaneous. In a moment. Just like that. You didn't expect it. You were planning on going to get fried chicken, or whatever. You're planning on going, and then boom! That's what Jesus is talking about here. So let's not become distracted with people's various interpretations of Matthew 24. And let's not become divided over people's opinions about end times. All right? But let's be united in being ready for Jesus' return. So I want us to be convinced that Jesus is coming. I want to convince anyone doubting that Jesus is coming again. And to do that, I'm going to go to 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3. Most importantly, I want to remind you that in the last days, scoffers will come, mocking the truth and following their own desires. They will say, what happened to the promise that Jesus is coming again? For before the times of our ancestors, everything has remained the same since the world was first created. The denial of the return of Jesus is what the scoffers are, that's what they're about. Like, nah, he's not coming back. This is a myth. This is a legend. This is a fairy tale. And so they're scoffing at Jesus' return. And the reason they do that, the primary driver in scoffing at the return of Jesus is about self. It's about doing what you want to do in spite of what God has said you to do or asked you to live a righteous life. You see, it removes, if there's no judge coming, it removes all accountability. But I'm telling you, like Flip Wilson said so many years ago, here come the judge. He's coming, right? He's coming. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but when I was in kindergarten, we learned how to be do a fire drill. And so the bell would ring, and we'd all line up at a certain spot, and we had our little places, probably alphabetically arranged, and the teacher would walk us through the hallway quietly, single file, straight out the door to our place on the playground where we would stand and await time to be said, hey, you can go back in. Now, we would do that 3-4 times a year, right? And you do that kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. You keep doing that, and then eventually by 5th grade, you're like, oh, it's another fire alarm. And you're not believing there's no fire, right? And so what are you doing when the alarm goes off? You're playing punch buggy with your buddy. You're shoving some kid around. You're trying to warm up to some girl you're sweet on, and you go out the hallway and you get a drink of water and you're goofing off, and like this fire alarm that went off, it just means you get another recess today. You get to go back outside, and then you're on the playground, right? I mean, we just stop believing that there's a fire. We start doubting that the real thing could ever possibly happen. When people stop believing that the real thing of Jesus' second coming will happen, they become cynical and they become rebellious. And this is what Peter's addressing. Disbelief in Jesus' return spirals into unrighteousness. But being ready creates righteousness. If we know that Jesus is coming back, we're going to attempt to live a righteous life. Those who disbelieve that there's a judgment to come for their actions do whatever they want. You've probably been familiar with what's happening in some of our cities, smash and grab, where people just go into a store and they just smash the cases open and take whatever they want, and many stores have closed down because of that. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because they know there's no judgment. They're doing that because there's no threat of going to prison for it, or they're going to get away with it. And so it's become a real problem. And so when there's no deterrent to crime, people get more criminal, right? They become more and more evil in their actions. And so you see, the awareness and the certainty of a second coming creates a right way of living. But when we scoff at that, when we say that's not going to happen, it doesn't matter how we live. And so the world doesn't fear the judgment because they don't believe they're going to be judged, and the second coming to them is just a distant fairy tale. But Peter confronts their fairy tale lies in their head by talking about science and history to convince them that Jesus is coming back. In the next verse he says this: they choose to forget that God made the heavens long ago by the word of His command, and He brought the earth out of the water and surrounded it with water. Then He used the water to destroy the ancient world with a mighty flood. And by the same word, the present heavens and earth have been stored up for the fire, and they are being kept for the day of judgment, when the ungodly people will be destroyed. And so these scoffers, they reject history and they reject science. What do I mean by that? Well, creation account says that God took this formless matter and created the universe that we live in. And all science points to intelligent design of our universe. Only those who are fools and those who refuse to believe what science says about intelligent design say that the universe was created by an accidental explosion. Like, that's ridiculous, right? It does not line up with any science that we know about. So we know there's a creation where matter was brought into organization and purpose and meaning. Okay, and then Peter also points to the flood. So there's the flood of Noah, where the earth was covered with water. That was the first judgment upon a wicked humanity. And there's over 500 stories of an ancient flood recorded in ancient civilizations. I mean, you go to one of these accounts, you can look these up in a number of places, but there are story after story in ancient civilizations that there was a flood that covered the earth. And in a lot of those ancient civilizations, they also have an account of a story of the first man and first woman who lived in a garden. How about that? Now, see, what I'm saying is that not just legends in these other cultures talk about the event of Noah's flood, but we have all this geological evidence that a massive flood covered the earth. There's civilizations here, and then there's this like 11 feet of clay, and then civilizations, you're like, I wonder what happened in the 11 feet of clay. Well, that's called the flood. And so these scoffers, they put their head in the sand to the evidence that is around them and in Scripture. They choose not to believe. We get a choice to what we believe. We can look at the evidence and say, yeah, I'll base my decision on the evidence that's around me. Or we can say, I don't want to look at the evidence because I want to live the way I want to live. And that's what these scoffers are doing. So don't run away from the obvious facts. Peter goes on to say, but you must not forget this one thing, dear friends. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. The Lord isn't really being slow about His promise, as some people think. No, He's being patient for your sake. He does not want anyone to be destroyed, but He wants everyone to repent. But the day of the Lord will come come unexpectedly as a thief. Quick, instantaneous. Don't look for a bunch of signs to happen, right? All the signs have happened. And there may be more, but I mean, He's coming soon, quickly, in a flash, in a blink, in a moment. And so be ready. Time is a created thing. God created time when He created the universe. God is outside of time. And so He sees the story from beginning to end at one time, but we only see one frame at a time. So back to my kindergarten days, we used to have these films, right? And they were on big reels. So some of you might remember this and might have saw a picture of it, but it's a big reel, and that film is wound up on one end, and then the teacher would put that on the front of the projector, and it would go through a series, and there would be a lamp behind it, and it'd show on a screen, and then it was supposed to go out the back and wind up on the back reel, right? And I remember a number of times where they didn't quite get the back reel right, and the film was all on the floor by the end of the presentation. You know, I remember that's funny. It was funny to me. She probably had a bad day or right, going home. But anyway, my point is, we're seeing things one frame at a time, but God sees the whole thing from beginning to end. Now, that does not remove your personal choice. It doesn't remove your freedom. But God knows the end, and that's how He's able to orchestrate things in our life, things that come apart, He's able to bring them back together because He knows the end. And so, God is patient, not wanting anyone to perish. And that's why, to us, it seems like a long time. But to God, who's outside of time, it doesn't seem long to Him, apparently. I don't know how to talk about that, but God's patience reveals His love for sinners. God loves sinners. God loves sinners. People who are far from God, God loves them. People who are in all types of sin, God loves them. And He's patient because He doesn't want anyone to miss being part of His eternal family. He's long-suffering, giving so many opportunities for people to be saved. Every time the sun comes up is another opportunity for a sinner to turn to Him. In 2005, Coast Guard Lieutenant Ian McConnell was ordered to fly his H-46 helicopter to New Orleans and to keep making trips round the clock to rescue people who were trapped on the roofs of their homes in the flood that's covered the city. Now, none of his crew were prepared for what they were about to see. On the first 3 missions, they rescued 89 people, 3 dogs and 2 cats. Yes, they rescued the cats, which is really, they are kind-hearted people. But anyway, when they made these return trips, because they're flying around the clock, rescuing people, they didn't rescue any more people, not one more person. They saw lots of people on their roof, but the people refused to get on the chopper. What they said was, "Did you bring us food and water?" And they tried to convince those people on those roofs that you don't want to stay here. this water is not receding anytime soon. You need to come with us right now. No, just bring us food and water. So many people died because they refused to get on the helicopter. They didn't believe it was the end. And it was the end. And they died because they refused the rescue operation. Please don't refuse God's attempt to save you. I want to go back to Matthew 24. If I haven't convinced you yet that Jesus is coming soon, I'm going to try again with Jesus' words. Nation will go to war against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. So Jesus identifies these birth pangs, these birthing pains, as wars, famines, and earthquakes. Wars, famines, and earthquakes. Now, here's what I know about birth pangs or birth pains. Almost nothing. Like zero. But before my first daughter's birth, I went to Lamaze class, and one of the things that we were taught was to pay close attention to the frequency and intensity of the birth pangs. Pay close attention. You know, you're timing it. I don't remember what the time was. So if you're pregnant with child right now, don't ask me to be your Lamaze person, because it's like, oh, you got days. Pay close attention to the intensity and frequency of those pains. So let me go over some of the birth pangs that our world is going through right now. Currently, there are 27 major war conflicts in the world. Famine is impacting 4 countries. 41 million people plus are dying or in the threat of death because of lack of food and water. Natural disasters are up 400% in the past 20 years. Pay attention to the intensity and the frequency of the birth pains. If you're looking for more evidence, you don't need to look anymore. And so the world is groaning. Now, what should our response be to the certain and instantaneous return of Jesus Christ? Well, let's go back to 2 Peter 3, verse 11. Since everything around us is going to be destroyed like this, what holy and godly lives should you live? Looking forward to the day of God and hurrying it along. On that day, He will set the heavens afire, and the elements will melt away in flames. But we are looking forward to the new heaven and the new earth He has promised, a world filled with God's righteousness. It seems like our world is coming apart. But in actuality, God is getting ready to put it back together for all those who live holy lives. Now, what is a holy life? Well, being morally clean and spiritually alert. Being morally clean and spiritually alert. The word holy means to be set apart for God's service. So this is what we're talking about, living holy lives. Like, we're aware of Jesus' mission to us, our co-mission with Him, if we would, to tell the world that Jesus is real, to tell the world Jesus loves them, to tell the world that God is patient, not wanting anyone to perish, but all to come to repentance. Like, God wants us to have that message on our lips when people want to have a conversation about that, and maybe even a conversation when they don't want to talk about that. But it looks like the world is coming apart, but He's really putting it back together. Charles Spurgeon says this about coming apart. He says, a Bible that's falling apart is usually carried by a person who isn't. So you stay in the Word. You stay in the Word of God. You stay connected to His people. You stay alive to the mission of Christ in your life. But let me ask a question. Have you made Jesus the authority of your life? He's the authority of your time, your money, your purpose. Is Jesus the authority of your life? Have you been baptized into Christ? The reason that we had a baptism in beginning this service is because when I asked that question, there was a woman here, Lisa, who was ready to make that decision and wanted to make that decision and did so. So, have you been baptized into Christ? This is an important question. Are you trying to live a holy life? Is there something in your life that is holding you back from coming into the presence of Father? When you pray, does it start with guilt and shame? When you come to church, do you feel like the doors are going to fall in on you? I mean, all that type of metaphor. Are you wondering if you have a relationship with Jesus? If you are ready, I'm asking you to put on one of these bands and wear it for the next 5 weeks. And the band is intentionally, I purchased bands that look sort of like the sky so that we would think about the return of Jesus. And that we would, I was taking this off and on yesterday, different times for different reasons, and each time I put it back on, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm talking about tomorrow. Am I ready? Maybe when you have this on, you interact with a conversation. Hey, what's that band about? And you're like, well, the preacher asked me to wear it because I'm ready for the second return of Jesus. I'm ready. What are you talking about? And then the conversation launches and you get to talk about it. But it's just a reminder to be ready. Now, I don't want you to put one on if you're not ready. If you haven't given your life to Christ, if you haven't confessed Him, if you haven't been baptized into Christ, if there's something that you're practicing in your life, some type of sin that's separating you from being in His presence, from feeling like you're in fellowship with Him, I want to have a conversation. I'm going to be standing right down here as we sing this last song. And I want to have a conversation to help you take the next right step to be ready, because you want to be ready. Now, I'm not trying to, frighten anyone, but it is part of the gospel that this world will eventually end and a new heaven and a new earth will come. And that transition is a big deal, and we want to be ready for it. And so I just hope if you need to have a conversation that we would have that today, and I can guide you to your next right step into following Him and being ready. Let's stand and sing.